Facing mounting criticism over the U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, the Defense Secretary of America, Jim Mattis, now saying that U.S. financial and material support for the coalition is not unconditional. And in fact, that Saudis must do a better job of trying to avoid innocent loss of life. That Yemen conflict has killed thousands of innocent people, thousands of kids. This month alone, a coalition airstrike on a school bus using a U.S.-made missile killed 40 children out on a field trip. Last week, 2 different air raids killed 26 children and 4 women. The UN says that the conduct could amount to war crimes intentionally targeting unarmed civilians, especially children and women.
This conflict has to end. Civilians have suffered enough.
And with me in studio now is Dr. Nachum Shiloh, who is with the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University, an expert on this conflict that is about to stretch into its 4th year. Thanks for being with us. A big question here, are these children that have died, are they being intentionally targeted? Is the goal to kill these kids to send a message, or is this, unfortunately, just the cost of a civil war, that innocents sometimes die in a mistaken attack?
Well, there is no evidence that the killing of these children was intentional. However, the amount of casualties of unarmed civil casualties, women, children, elderly, is exceeded a very serious number. We are talking about the thousands now, and there are estimations that since the conflict began in 2015, there were up to 10,000 civilian casualties. And this number is not acceptable by any scale, by any means.
The Saudi coalition, I mean, they just signed a massive military deal with the U.S. They're getting U.S. missiles, U.S. equipment, U.S. software, radar. Do they know what they're doing with this equipment? Does the U.S. make sure that this equipment isn't being used to kill innocent life? Is it being used properly, or is they just hand over the gear?
It seems not only to me, but to other experts, that they just hand over the gear without making the necessary requirements and to make sure that it's not used against civilians.
That's a problem, isn't it?
It's a big problem, yes.
All right, so I guess what the UN is taking notice on this, they're raising the alarm bell, saying that this could amount to war crimes. Where do things go from here? The war about to stretch into its 4th year. Any signs of it coming to an end?
Unfortunately not. As we see since 2015, there is an armed conflict in Yemen. On the ground, there is a stalemate. Both parties, the Houthis in the north and west, and the Saudi-led coalition with the legal government in Yemen in the east and southeast, with a vast amount of territories controlled by Al-Qaeda. Up to 40% of all Yemeni territory is controlled by Al-Qaeda. And there is no move on the ground, and there is no agreement between the parties, and it doesn't seem to me that a certain side is going to win this war.
Is that because both sides, as you mentioned, they both have significant territory? They have important cities, important resources, and ports. I mean, at some point, does other international partners have to come in? Can this be resolved among themselves?
It cannot resolve between the parties, because the parties are the Houthis and the legal government, but they are only the proxies of Iran and Saudi Arabia. Until Iran and Saudi Arabia find some way to resolve the issue between them.
What's called a proxy war. This is a big proxy war.
Yes, it's a par excellence proxy war. At this time, no party seems to strive to end this conflict. The parties are more or less convenient with the territories gained on the ground. And I want to remind that this stalemate line is very similar to the old line that was separated between South Yemen and North Yemen. The old South Yemen and North Yemen, the communist and the tribal states.
And what we're seeing now as well is that it's not just the deaths from the conflict, the injuries, the strikes, the humanitarian costs. I mean, yes. There's no food. People can't drink clean water. There are hundreds of thousands are suffering.
Yes, more than 75% of the civil population in Yemen is starving. It's making less than $2 a day. They don't have access to food. And if food arrives, let's say the local parties, the local factors, they just confiscate the food and all the humanitarian aid, especially tribes that are taking over the food, and sometimes the fighting parties themselves. Very little amount of food reaches the
actual people who need it.
The actual people who need it.
All right, a story that we will stay on top of. Dr. Nachum Shiloh with the Moshe Dayan Center.